Zach Bitter, welcome to Understanding Ultra. I just want to thank you for spending some time talking to us this morning. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, as we've just been talking about. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun to come on podcasts and do the long form chat. So thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Brilliant. So for those that don't know you, you are a pro ultra runner. You have numerous records to your name. You have many race wins under your belt. You're also a coach and you're a podcaster. So that's my description of you. So in your own words, what is Zach Bitter all about?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good summary. I like to stay busy with a variety of different things. I don't really mind focusing on like a couple or a few topics, but I like to do different things within it. So, the running side or the actual physical doing of ultra marathons and that sort of stuff is always a fun aspect of it. But the coaching kind of adds that other aspect of like kind of the thought process behind why I'm doing what I'm doing, or why someone else is doing what they're doing or should be doing what they should be doing, and all that stuff, the problem solving aspect of it. And then the podcasting is another way to kind of share stuff that I've learned, as well as learn from others and things like that. So I like to bring on folks who have an interest in something I'm interested in, or a topic I'm interested in learning more about. So I think with those three things, there's a fairly good balance within the topic of running, although my podcast goes quite a bit outside of running at times. So that one's maybe a little bit more of a separation. But yeah, that's kind of how I would sum it up.
The podcast, I must admit, this it's how I came to know you as an ultra runner, from my own searching the internet for resources, into diving into a low carb, high fat sort of protocol, and I managed to find the HPO podcast. It must have been, trying to think, how long has it been going? So it must be like 3 or 4 years ago. So when yeah, is that when you started it?
Yeah, I think it was in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. 2000, maybe it was even early 2018. It's been at least 3 years. I know that. I just recorded the 360th episode yesterday, so they're piling up.
Yeah, great. I must admit that, it was. I think you'd probably done like 2 or 3 episodes by the time that I found you, and
Okay.
that was it. I was hooked because there was nothing else like it on podcasts. I searched and searched for something that related, because I was trying. There was plenty of stuff about keto and low carb, but there was nothing that really applied it to ultra running, which was the thing that I was like desperate to try and figure out, because my own failed experiments of thinking, because I'd read about it and thought, this is what I want to do. I want to be fat adapted. No clue at all on how to do it. I just thought, well, okay, I'll just literally just cut all carbs out of my life and try and carry on normal training. And basically, I think I got to about the third day of running on zero carbs, and it didn't go well. I was on my normal run commutes on the way home, which is only like 7 miles each way, and I try and do that under normal circumstances, just backwards and forwards, and that's my daily miles. But I literally got to about 3 miles into this run, and I had absolutely nothing left. I'd experienced like a bonk or hitting the wall in races before, but never just in my normal daily commute. And I had to like sheepishly phone my wife and say, please, can you come and pick me up? I don't think I can make it the rest of So that was
Yeah. There tends to be a lot of confusion. I think it's mostly I think just, it's like you said, there's a lot of information out there, but it's oftentimes not necessarily context specific. So you start kind of looking into like other people's anecdotes and things like that. You can get confused pretty quickly. And I mean, that's like anything for the most part, but especially in the world of ultra marathon running. But But with the high fat, low carb stuff specifically, I think, you see someone who's using it for like therapeutic uses, or they're using it and having a relatively sedentary life, certainly compared to your 2 by 7 mile commute. And that's just a much different context. They could have like a third of the carbohydrates you'd have and have a hard time pushing, even like mild to moderate levels of ketosis, whereas you could probably, like I said, triple what they had and start even pushing into some moderate to even high ranges of ketosis at times, depending on what your training volume looks like and the timing of it all. So it gets kind of interesting once you start actually putting into practice and seeing for yourself what happens between zero carb, which sounds like didn't go too well for you, and perhaps a little bit more carb friendly version of a low carb approach, which I think is oftentimes a sweet spot for endurance athletes who are going to use that type of a method.
Yeah, because I think when you talk to people about low carb running, if they don't really have a clue about it, they just assume that you have zero carbs and that's how you approach it. But yeah, I know, from listening to your podcast, I know how you have like a periodized approach to your training and your nutrition as well. And I think that it takes a while, doesn't it? And I must admit that, that your podcast was one of the resources that I used for dialing that in, realizing that, you didn't have to go super, super low, and realize that, you do need the carbs strategically. I know there's that we get criticized for using the term strategic carbs, don't we, at times, but that is what it is. And I think once you've done it for a few years, you kind of get into like a bit of a flow, and you realize that you do need carbs, but you understand how to bring them in. But as far as that's concerned, that was going to be one of my sort of the things I wanted to ask you about. As a coach, how do you, if one of your clients comes to you, because I have this, I do a bit of coaching, and the question, and like yourself, I wouldn't advertise the fact that I myself, my Instagram doesn't say coach, low carb, high fat coach, come to me for keto advice. But because you can't, as a coach, you can't do that, can you? You've got to be on an even keel, and you've got to be balanced with your clients. But if one of your clients comes to you and says, Zach, I need you to help me go low carb, I really want to get fat adapted, how do you go about introducing that to them, especially if they've been used to the usual high carb kind of athlete lifestyle?
Yeah, it's a fun question, and it's one I get a lot. I'll have folks come to me just in coaching in general. I usually don't bring up diet specifically unless they want to talk about it. I kind of take up, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it type of approach with ultra marathons. That is within the reason, obviously. Like when it comes down to like practicing what they're going to do on race day and getting in, if they say they're a moderate to high carbohydrate diet, there's going to be a slightly different race day approach than if they're a low carbohydrates diet or person. So if someone comes to me specifically and says, I'm really interested in going low carb, I've been moderate high carb, I might pry a little bit to find out like what their why is or what their reason is for wanting to do that, as well as just kind of playing around with like what experiences they've had with their current approach, just to see like where are the areas that we're trying to improve. And then we just start talking about like what are some of the advantages that they may see giving their specific set of circumstances by kind of moving lower carbohydrate, and then start kind of playing around from there. And usually when they come to me with that question, they've done enough poking around to know that it's something they're going to try. And, then I'm more than willing to help them kind of navigate that, because there are some kind of what I call it, maybe pitfalls or something that you can do along the way. And I mean, we kind of talked about some too. Some people think like, well, I need to remove all the carbohydrates altogether and go on a zero carb diet. And there are folks who do that, but more often than not, I find when someone has a well-structured kind of periodized endurance training plan, there's going to be some fluctuations, and it's going to be kind of context specific. Like, what are we focusing on? Are we in the off season? Are we doing some base building? Are we introducing some kind of short interval sessions, some tempo run, long interval sessions? Are we trying to just like develop the aerobic threshold? Like, what are we doing in training? And then we kind of start piecing things together from there. So, yeah, usually, if someone has never done it before and they're coming to me from a moderate to high carbohydrate foundation, I usually recommend that they implement any type of dietary change in the off season versus trying to do it mid season or in the lead up to the race itself. And that gives them the opportunity to maybe spend about a month doing a little more of a strict low carbohydrate kind of ketogenic type approach for a while. And I don't think that's necessarily something that has to be done. You're going to improve your fat oxidation rates just by lowering your carbohydrate intake, even if you go from like 60% carbohydrate down to 30% carbohydrate. That reduction in the carbohydrate you're giving your body to fuel with is going to encourage your body to burn higher levels of fat. So like you can get better at burning fat without going really low like that. But sometimes I think it's a good kind of way to start, just because it gives you an idea of what it feels like to be in a little more of a strict ketogenic approach. Gives them an idea of just how sustainable or unsustainable they think it's going to be for them. Ultimately, it's, I like kind of going about it the way I do with an endurance plan, because you do end up bringing back enough carbohydrate over the course of a training plan where you don't feel like it's quite as restrictive as what it would maybe be if you're trying to go zero carbohydrate and remove the macronutrient altogether, versus like what I'm doing, where at certain times in my training, I might be having just as much carbohydrate as a sedentary person would on a moderate carbohydrate diet, but I'm just, burning 2 to 3 times as much as calories per day as they are. So it ends up being a context question at that point.
Yeah, it's all it's interesting, isn't it? Because the same as training for people is individualized and nuanced. Mm-hmm. You realize that, just like a one size fits all for training doesn't work for your coaching clients. It's the same. It can be the same thing can be applied with nutrition, can't it? Or a dietary intervention, that just because it worked for one person doesn't necessarily it's going to work for another. And even if it does work for them, it may not work in the same way, and their needs may need more carbohydrates than somebody else does. And some people can get away with super low carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. So you've just got to kind of find your balance, haven't you? I think in things.
Yeah, and I mean that's been the most probably interesting part of this whole journey for me is, with myself, I've been doing it for a little over 10 years. It took me maybe a year and a half to 2 years to really fine tune what I felt was just like, okay, I can repeat this and I can start predicting what's going to happen when I do this. And I just had enough experiences kind of banked where I could kind of go navigate it a little more intuitively. When I'm working with other people, it's always really interesting to me I usually have like, I'll usually encourage folks once we start getting into structured training to be at around 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrate is kind of a good starting point. We can always flex up or down from there. And I've had folks where we just flex all the way back up to moderate carbohydrate and they find out that's where they perform the best. And then I have folks where they want to, go lower than that and they push lower than that. And I give them some workouts that I'm convinced are going to put them in a bad place and they nail them. And I'm just like, okay, well, I mean, it wouldn't have worked for me, but it worked for you. So at the end of the day, I think when you follow the results and if those results are showing up on paper, I guess it's on Strava and all these other platforms nowadays, but wherever it is, they're being stored, as long as they're showing up on there and they're showing up right, then it's working more or less. And it is one of those things too, where, sometimes we pick a variable that we want to talk about and we hyper focus on that one variable and forget that there's tons other variables that we actually do know about. And then there's probably tenfold that more that we're not even aware of that are like working in the background and impacting how we're performing and racing and things like that. So it can be very easy if you want to try to credit or discredit a certain approach by just focusing on one specific aspect and saying, well, look at this, there's a deficit there. And it's like, did that deficit come with 5 or 6 positives that outweighed that deficit? Or did that deficit create 5 or 6 more deficits that put you in a real spiraling downward? And, you know, there's there's a lot more clarity, I think, when you start thinking of it more as a whole. And when we're talking about running and running performance specifically, then, you know, the workouts are going to drive that. And that's how I usually dictate whether I would recommend someone to kind of increase or decrease their carbohydrates.
Because there's often criticism at time, isn't there, of low carb for ultra running. You know, I know there's, you know, I listen to, probably like yourself, listen to lots of different podcasts and some high profile coaches that completely slam it and are not interested at all and say that it's, you know, it's messing with metabolism and things like that. How would you, because I find myself defending it quite a lot to other runners, how do you approach criticism of it? So when people sort of say you can't, it's not, you know, you can't, it's not viable long term, it may work to lose weight, and that's why, you know, I've had people say this to me before, that you only saw an increase in performance because you lost weight from you know, from going low carb. How do you react to people when they criticize you? I don't suppose whether you get criticism regularly on that subject anymore, or do you just let your own results speak for themselves?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I get pushback from time to time, I would say, but it's not anything too harsh for the most part. I mean, it's probably, if I were a little more like absolute about it, I'm sure I'd probably get a lot more kind of negative feedback. And I probably should at that point, if I were going out there saying, look, every ultra marathon runner should be adopting some version of a low carbohydrate diet, then I would deserve some backlash. But I'm just simply not doing that. So you know, that's probably part of the reason. And I would say, like, someone who comes out and says every ultra marathoner should be following a moderate to high carbohydrate diet, they should get pushback as well, because we don't know that. Like, we don't know a whole lot at all about ultra marathon nutrition, what's optimal and what's not. And the likely scenario with the races, as long as the ones we're doing, is there's going to be kind of a variety of different approaches, and some are going to work well for some and some are going to work better for others. And there may be one that by a percentage is going to work better, like, or is going to work for a higher percentage of the population, but that doesn't mean that it's an absolute. So I think when you find yourself in a position where you're telling anyone your performance will suffer by going low carbohydrate, or your performance will improve by going moderate carbohydrate, or take the opposite approach and say your performance will improve by going low carb or suffer by going moderate high carb, then you're creating an absolute, and you're ostracizing the folks that aren't going to fit within that framework. So you can kind of look at that as a positive or a negative, I guess. It's one of those things where, with a sport that, you know, in a lot of cases starts getting exciting at the 100-mile distance, it's just a sport where there's a lot of unknowns. I think that's what makes the sport fun. That's what makes it interesting, and what draws people to it. It's what separates us from kind of like the Olympic distance sports, where there is a lot easier time doing research and kind of finding out what might work or what won't work in a majority of cases, or a high number of cases. So, you know, I think that we should embrace that. And if people find that, like, a certain, let's take your example, let's say someone loses a bunch of weight by following a low carbohydrate diet, and then their race performances improve, that's great. That's an improvement. And I don't think we should look at that as like, well, you could have done it with a moderate carbohydrate approach and possibly run faster yet, because you don't know that about that individual. That individual may not have been able to find a moderate carbohydrate diet sustainable for them in a way which allowed them to lose that weight. Just like there are folks who need a different approach other than low carbohydrate to lose weight. So I think when we get into the category of just like what is sustainable for someone, it's a very preference based, it's very individual based. And, you know, if someone adopts an eating pattern that allows them to feel comfortable and stick to it and find it sustainable, even if that's completely opposite of what you would find, you can't really push back too much on that, I don't think, because it's a very individual thing. And I think we should respect that. And if they find success in it, embrace it and applaud it and move forward within that context. So if I have someone, I see this all the time, more so with like the marathon and below distance, where there'll be someone who, starts running like a bunch of PRs and the Olympic distance stuff, and they're following like a strict ketogenic diet. And, they'll get pushback. Sometimes it's because they're being a little outspoken about it. But, it is one thing. It's like, when we start getting into those distances, there is going to be a much more noticeable trade-off by completely removing a carbohydrate from your diet. But if that person was never going to get to the point where they were able to, lose that excess 20 pounds of body weight, and, they maybe leave their optimal potential on the table because of it, so be it. Most people are doing that anyway, because most people aren't living like a professional Olympic athlete. So like everyone's essentially, that's not a professional athlete, is leaving some stuff on the table just by the nature of their lifestyle, not being, that of something that's focusing very myopically on a specific distance and a specific kind of time target or place target within that.
I think people shouldn't be closed-minded as well to all options, because I know from my own experience of when I first heard about low carb and being fat adapted and everything, I was like, no, it can't. It's not. Sure, it's not sustainable. But then trying it myself and battling through and actually getting through and having great results, like literally going from like a mid-pack runner to like within the space of like 6 months, like winning my first ultra. And for me, that was it. I was like, right, that is it. And I almost became a little bit absolute with it, until I then decided that I needed to sort of not go the other way, but prove to myself that what was it? Was it the fact that I lost weight and got a bit quicker, or was it the diet? Was it that I was fat adapted, and was that the thing? So I then sort of did an experiment to go the other way and start introducing more carbs back in and everything, and eventually found that I didn't do so well on it, and realized that coming back to low carb was the thing that started to bring my performance back again. But I think being closed-minded to it initially, people could probably do with, I think everybody should try it, at least try it, just to see if it works for them. That's the thing, because if you don't try it, then you're not going to know the potential that you could have to use it towards your advantage. And I think everyone that seems to be, everyone's in camps on social media, aren't there? High fat, low carb, keto, carnivores, you got the vegans. Everyone has got their little box that they put themselves into, and I was finding myself sort of keeping myself falling into that sort of trap. And I thought I need to sort of come out of there. So I've endeavoured to do my own experiments and trying carnivore, trying different things, and even like yourself, trying like a plant-based diet. And I listened to your podcast recently with a guy that he did a month of carnivore and a month of plant-based, and it was interesting to hear his results. And it just shows, doesn't it, that the body can thrive on it, just adapts, doesn't it? It can adapt and thrive whatever you throw at it. Same with training. Whatever you throw at your body, eventually it will adapt to it and start to use it to its full potential. But you don't know until you try. That's the thing, is it? You've got to be open to trying new things, I think.
I think if there's one short, easy way to kind of say it, it's just like, abstain from absolutes when it comes to nutrition with ultra marathons, because race intensity is very slow, so we can easily hyper focus on one variable within the training plan and say, oh, look, there's a deficit there. But, ultimately we have to look at everything in order to kind of come up with a solution. And that's oftentimes going to be, like we said, kind of an individual endeavor. So be curious, try things out. If you're not interested, don't feel like you have to do anything, but if you are interested, don't go on Twitter and and decide whether you want to do it or not.
Yeah, stay away from the Twitter. As far as your training then goes, what does your training look like on a daily basis? And I know this is like a loaded question, isn't it? Because depending on what time of the year it is, what races you're building up for, but what is your set routine that you try and keep on a daily, weekly, monthly basis throughout sort of like a season of racing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, if I'm coming off like an off season, that'll just be maybe like anywhere between probably like 2 to 4 weeks of like unstructured, training. I guess I'll call it training, although if it's unstructured, maybe it wouldn't be, but that might include running. It might not. It just really depends on what I feel like I need physically and mentally to bounce back from whatever the race was that I had just done. And then I'll usually get to the end of that and I'll start structuring things. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just do like I'll just be kind of testing out where my fitness is at. Usually I'll lose a little bit of a fitness. That's intentional though. I think like when you peak for a race, there's just, you're at a fitness where it's just probably not sustainable year round. So you want to kind of let that go, give yourself an opportunity to kind of build back up to it. And that's how you kind of keep coming back one year after the next, in my opinion. So I'll usually I'll use a couple things. Like I lean pretty heavily early on as like what my pace is at my aerobic threshold. It's kind of similar to maybe like a maximum aerobic function training type of strategy where I'm looking at just like kind of a heart rate range or a perceived effort. These days I'm doing a lot more with perceived effort just because I've gotten that dialed in over the years, and then I can kind of spot check heart rate and use heart rate as like a post-workout analytical tool when I feel like I've been able to control enough variables to make it an accurate measurement. And I'll just be kind of teasing out where I am there. If I'm in a really good spot there, then I usually start looking at like what race I want to do next. And once I pick that, I kind of start building backwards there with kind of placing things that are maybe a little less specific to the race intensity itself, or things that I find are a relative weakness that I want to kind of clean up or get on top of before I really get into the bulk of the specific stuff. And I'll work on those for a while. So that might be a lot more like short interval work, stuff like that, a little more speed work. I've gone back and forth between kind of isolating intensities into blocks where, you do just really work on short intervals, which are going to be very unspecific, obviously, to, like 100-mile race pace. So it makes sense to do those further away from the race itself. And then kind of a block of training kind of in a little bit more of what we call like our lactate threshold type intensity or tempo run intensity. Functional threshold power is another way to think about it, or some people will just think of it as like, what's the intensity you can sustain for 60 minutes on an all-out 60-minute time trial. That's another way to maybe look at it. And that's kind of in between, or that's gonna be a little slower than like the short intervals they'll do. So I'll usually break those into kind of longer intervals or tempo runs. And then I'll do a block where I'm just really almost kind of back to aerobic threshold, because that just tends to be pretty similar to 100-mile intensity. Within reason, it's a little bit, when I have my aerobic threshold really fine-tuned, that's going to be a little faster than my 100-mile pace, but it's a pretty close proximate thing. So I'll have a little work on that, as well as like backloading my weeks into race pace, race intensity. I'll start building up back-to-back long runs and trying to stack as much volume as my body can tolerate and recover from at that specific intensity. And that allows me to work on just like the fueling strategy and the stuff like that. So that's a little bit more of a separated version. I've also blended too, where I kind of spend a little more of those short interval and kind of long interval tempo runs together. And then I might phase out some of those short intervals near the end just to save a little bit of training load for the long run and stuff like that, but still keep in a little bit more of like that lactate threshold type training, maybe like one short session a week or something like that. And I can't say that one stands out drastically over the other. I think it's probably like nutrition, where there is there's probably a few different strategies that are going to work pretty well. And if you're consistent within them, you'll probably see a lot of results. I don't know that we know for sure if there's one that's going to be like, bulletproof. So when I'm doing that, a lot of times I'm trying to think of like, well, what's my goal here? What am I trying to improve? And once I kind of pinpoint that, you can start adding a little flavor to stuff where, I don't feel like I have to be just basically working from a template of just, a dozen different workouts over the course of a training block and have them just like specifically laid out exactly the way they were the time before. I can mix them up a little bit. So for like short intervals, I'll usually work with anything between 30 seconds up to 4 minutes. And, on paper, perhaps 2 to 4 minutes is a sweet spot in a lot of cases for that type of an intensity. But, it's a pretty small variance. So like if for whatever reason, I'm way more excited to do 60-second intervals and that's going to get a better output from me. Again, now we're getting into the individual side of things. Or maybe you could say the art of training versus the science of training. Well, then I probably might benefit from doing 60 seconds. Or if it's just like getting too repetitive to do like, the same interval time frame, maybe I'll mix it up and do like 3 by 3 minutes and then 3 by 2 minutes, 3 by 1 minute or something like that. All at kind of the same relative intensity, but kind of give you a little bit of a different flavor or something different to look forward to and that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer for you, but I think I covered a good chunk of the season with that stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving us that insight. As far as like being a coach yourself, did you ever have your own coach sort of when you started ultra running?
Not in ultra running, no. I mean, I've had coaches in my life before, like high school, college, and that sort of stuff. But I haven't ever been coached myself. I've been fortunate to know a lot of ultra runners who also coach and who've really taken this sort of stuff seriously. So I have people I can bounce ideas off of and things like that, and get ideas and get a second set of eyes on things that I'm doing. And if I want to hear like some criticism or some encouragement, depending on how they feel about the strategy I'm using, I guess that's been very helpful. But in terms of having someone kind of sit down and actually build a plan for me, and then I follow that plan, hasn't been something I've done.
Yeah. Is that something that you would struggle with would that be sort of like a lifestyle thing, or is it just the fact that as a coach yourself, you feel like you know what's best for you already?
I think there's a few things. I think one is I really enjoy building my own plan. So it's like something I don't really want to give it away. I'm not afraid to alter my plan or change things or receive criticism and adjust when people want to do that. But I don't know that I want to hand over the reins entirely, because I find that as one of the motivating things about it. So I totally understand why someone would want to do that. Like if I had to, if I was working a more standard occupation, I'd probably lean a little closer to that, because now there's just there's only so much bandwidth one can tolerate. They might want to have someone else just give me the procedure so I can just do it and then get on with the rest of my day kind of a mindset. Yeah. Whereas I I really kind of enjoy that process of kind of building it and structuring it. So I like to kind of keep control of that. Not that you can't with a coach. I think there's probably coach client relationships that are a little more like a 50-50, where it's let's sit down and collaborate versus let me guide you. And maybe I get closer to that with just discussions with friends and other runners and things like that. And it feeds into my decision-making more than I recognize all the time. But generally speaking, I think at this point, I'm not interested in kind of offloading that side of the puzzle at this time. And it is also I said, there's probably a variety of different things. The other thing too is I just think ultra running is different enough and unknown enough that there is going to be some things that that you're going to respond to that are just going to be really hard for someone else to really kind of get under and get into. And I kind of like that exploratory side of things as well. So, so yeah, I think, it's something I kind of like about it. And so far I haven't jumped over. Maybe I'll change that eventually if I get to a point where I get sick of programming my own stuff. It's just weird with ultra running. There's so many different varieties of things that usually if I get sick of a specific event, I just do something different, and take my mind off what I had been doing and focus on something that's different enough. And that's enough flavor to kind of inject the excitement again. So I haven't gotten to a point where that has happened yet, I guess.
Yeah, it's so varied, isn't it, ultra running? It's not like where you've got your set distances with the track events and then you've got the marathon. And once somebody learns how to train for a marathon, or somebody trains somebody else to do a marathon, then that's like a set thing, isn't it? That you can sort of say, well, that's that training that applies to that. But when it comes to ultras, the fact that an ultra starts at anything over a marathon, and your 50Ks, your 100Ks, and everything in between, up to like multi-day. You know, I know you've done. Is it 6 days in the dome? Is it called that?
I've done the event, but I haven't done more than 12 hours there. So it's been more of for me, a single day.
Yeah. But the fact that, one person's ultra is going and running 100 miles in the mountains and somebody else's ultra is running 12 hours on a track, it's so varied, isn't it? That, yeah, the possibilities are seemingly endless, and the mistakes that you can make are endless in an ultra, aren't they? And the fact that ultra can be so long means you've got more time to make those kinds of mistakes. Do you find yourself, over your career of running, has there been anything that you've looked back on and thought, why did I do that? Any like absolutely howling mistakes that you've made that you kicked yourself for afterwards?
Yeah, the one or uninteresting thing is, I think there's a huge terrain variable with ultra running where you get to a point where you really fine tune something. So for me, that's running on flat, hard surfaces. And I got, to a point where I could tolerate an incredible amount of training load in order to, improve or be ready for a race. So then when I would decide to say, okay, I want to do this trail race, and the terrain that I'm going to be working on, I have access to it. Living in Phoenix, I have access to basically everything, especially if I'm willing to drive an hour or two. So, you can really fine tune your training environment to match that of the course you're trying to do. One thing, when my wife and I first moved to Phoenix, I realized I had to reduce my training volume by almost like 50% as I was introducing some of the more desert trails into it, just because of the way that it beat up my body differently. I needed to let some of those areas that weren't quite as strong kind of catch up, even though I was fit enough to tolerate, the same amount of volume that I was doing on the roads and the track. I needed to let some of the other areas kind of catch up. So that's a little bit of a like kind of a touch and go type of a thing. You have to like let your body like kind of dictate what you're gonna give it from a stress component. My biggest example of that is I got into Western States in 2017, kind of late. I got in on a sponsorship spot. It was going to go to somebody else, and then they ended up not being able to use it. So I think I can't remember how late it was, maybe like 8 or 10 weeks out. So I had been training for a flat track 100 at the time. And I switched gears. I took the spot and I switched gears, and I went straight to climbing and descending. And I was kind of in hindsight, it was a pretty stupid move. I kind of kept the same training load, but just switched to a lot more climbing and descending, and ended up getting a stress fracture in my right sacroiliac, which kept me from the starting line. So I learned that lesson. But even with those sort of things, there's things you can learn from that. Like through that process, I was able to kind of slow things down for a period of time and recognize like where some other areas of weaknesses maybe were, and identify some of those, and then start working on that, so that when I did come back and running, I also was kind of armed with more resources in terms of kind of how my body worked and what I needed to do for it in order to be ready to go for another race. So I think you're going to make mistakes when you're training and coaching ultra marathons, just based on the breadth of the sport and the relative uncertainty that we still have within like proper training and racing and all that stuff. That I think the only like big mistake you can make that really will hinder your progress in the long term is not stepping back and trying to identify like what went wrong or what can I learn from this. Like I've learned a lot from races that have gone terribly wrong, as well as ones that I've done really well at. So I think just kind of looking at it through what can I learn from this experience versus this was a failure or a success is generally speaking the way to kind of formulate what's going to work for you on race day with this type of sport.
Yeah, there's so many variables, isn't there, with ultras. It's and just when you think that you've got over, you've nailed one part of it, then something
it's
else.
Like whack-a-mole.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, whack-a-mole. One thing after another. Yeah, amazing. As far as your training is concerned, do you have like a specific workout that when you're leading into a race, there's one workout that you plan to do X amount of time out from it, that if you hit it and you hit it like spot on, that you're ready for that event? Is there anything that you plan in and look forward to do in preparation for a race, like one single workout? Do you have anything like that?
I would say more than a single workout, like if I can block my long runs and kind of nail those and still retain a good portion of like my fitness at like where my lactate threshold is, I'm pretty confident going in. So what that maybe looks like on paper would be if I go out and do like a 3 to 4 hour run on a track on back-to-back days, and I'm at or just a bit faster than goal pace and things go really smoothly there. And then after that, I take a few easy days. And then if I can go out and do like, do like a 12 to 15 mile run with a good chunk of it, like targeting kind of lactate threshold, and feel like my pace is still pretty solid there, even though I've been spending the majority of my last few weeks targeting the goal intensity, then I feel like I've got gears as well as just kind of a lot of stamina within the intensity I plan on racing. That's usually a big confidence booster. That and just having the opportunity to practice my fueling strategy and stuff during some of those long runs, and if it goes well there, great. And then if I can do all of that with relatively warmer weather than what I'll be racing in, even better, which is almost always the case here in Phoenix. So that's nice. Specifically when I ran 11:19 for 100 miles, I had a block of back-to-back long runs, basically in the back end of the summer here in Phoenix. So there was a few of them where it was hitting triple digits by the end of it. That particular race that I did that at was at the Olympic training facility in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that's in a speed skating rink. So they keep it at 60 degrees. So it was like literally almost twice as hot on some of my training stimulus runs. And, I don't know that I recognized it quite as much during the process as much as afterwards, but afterwards at the end, I was like thinking to myself, I was like, well, yeah, if I could do say 60 to 70 miles over the course of 2 runs and be, 10, 15 seconds per mile faster than my 100-mile pace, and not feel destroyed after those 2 sessions, then, the work is there. Like then it's just about executing properly, like not messing up your nutrition on race day, not messing up your pacing on race day. You're not making a big enough mistake that you can't, recover from it. And so those are sort of things that kind of stand out to me. If they go well, that chances are I'm in a good place to have a good race if I execute.
I think there's an expression in there, the hay is in the barn.
Yeah.
At that point.
Mm-hmm.
The hard work is done in it by that point. Yeah. Brilliant. As far as kit goes, I know you're obviously an ultra man, and I love ultra gear as well. As soon as I made the switch, I was having trouble with knee problems, and someone recommended going to a zero drop shoe, and the transition was difficult at first, but obviously it pays off with time. But as far as like your gear and the gear that you use for your running, is there anything that you that stands out for you that you cannot live without, that you've got to have it, and if you haven't got it, you're on the phone trying to get
it? For the race specifically, or just in training?
Or in either training or racing.
Yeah. The footwear stuff is interesting because the whole shoe technology has thrown a big wrench into kind of what is an optimal race shoe, in my opinion. When I started ultra running, I liked a really low profile, flat, firm shoe, and I still do. But come race day now, like there is a performance advantage to have, a max cushion, like new foam technology, which is something I haven't really had a chance to use in its full capacity yet. I wore a pair of prototypes that Ultra's making for the USATF 100-mile road championships. And what I did in them to lead up to that and in the race itself, it seems like they kind of fit the bill for, the improvements in technology that is described with that sort of tech. The hard part on that particular day was it was 94 degrees because they had to delay the race a couple of months due to the whole COVID experience. So it was a little harder to compare that one to, say, like a more controlled environment where I've run fast races in the past. But I look forward to kind of teasing that out a little bit more in the future. But with that said, in training, I'm still going to be, I like to do what I call like a shoe quiver. So I think there's going to be purposes for a variety of different shoe types, depending on what you're trying to do and what your body is currently doing or recovering from. So I like to do enough low profile firm shoes so I really get like a good hard like stimulus for my lower legs, and also force my body to find that really precise landing point. The firmer the shoe, the lower profile of the shoe, the more likely you're going to find that sweet spot on your foot, just because there's a lot less forgiveness to drift away from it. However, if I'm in a situation where I did, like, say, those back-to-back 30-mile long runs and I wore lower profile, firmer shoes for those, and then I have a couple of easy days and, my feet and ankles and calves are a little sore and the rest of my body, I might put on a little more of a cushion soft shoe for a run or two, just to kind of forgive that area of my body. What I like to tell people with that, though, is those impact forces are going to end up somewhere. The question is where. So you might want to protect the weakest spot for any given day in terms of trying to give that area a break from some of those impact forces. So soft and cushy can be good for the lower legs in terms of protecting them, but it gives you a little more variability on where your foot's going to plant and bear weight. So you may send some impact forces into your knees and hips and things like that. So if you're dealing with knees and hips issues, then maybe you want something a little more firm. Doesn't necessarily have to be like low profile, but a midsole compound that's a little more firm, that's not going to squish in as much when you step down on it. Another thing is when I'm on trails, I supinate pretty heavily. So I come down on the outside of my foot. If I'm wearing a really, really soft shoe on trails and I hit I step on a rock or step on something that's kind of already tilted to the outside, I'm already on that edge. So that cushion, when I push down on that, push down further, which tips me even more. So I'm just way more prone to roll that ankle outside. So like for me, if it's like a trail race that's got any sort of technicality, regardless of whether the shoe is got a lot of midsole or not, I want to have it be firm so that when I do come down on that outside of my foot, it doesn't push down even further and create a situation where I'm real vulnerable to turn that ankle over. So that would be kind of, I guess, a piece of equipment where I would get real specific on with that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Or picky, maybe you'd say.
Yeah, and there's plenty to choose from, isn't there? It's interesting that you mentioned a prototype. So Ultra going into are you allowed to talk about it? Is it a carbon plate shoe?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every brand now has a version of this. Whether it's out in the public yet or not is usually the question. And it dates back to, like, I think late 2015 is when Nike first had their first prototypes with the new shoe technology. Essentially, I mean, it's the foam is really the big mover there. The carbon plate makes a difference too, but the foam is the big mover. Essentially, what they were able to do is when you step down into foam, you're going to push down into it and it's going to give back some energy. So the equation is kind of like how much energy do you lose pushing down and how much you get back from the pushback from the foam. The foam technology has gotten so good now where now the relative loss is really minimized. So this is where they get a lot of those efficiency scores of, it's like I think like most of the real like strict treadmill tests has it anywhere between 2 to 8% improvement in efficiency. So that's where the real I think value is in that. Now you put carbon plates in there and that can kind of give it another component or another kind of like a snapback, I guess, because you can layer them too, which I don't think you can really do anymore because now they've put at least some regulations on it. But I did a podcast with Dr. Jeff Burns, who's just a great resource for this if you want to get into the weeds with just like how the foam works, how the carbon plate plays into that and all that stuff. But specific to ultras, yeah, they've been working on a shoe now for almost 2 years that they're going to release in early 2022. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to wear test it, and it has gotten approved by World Athletics, so I can use it in competition. I mean, it gets really goofy because you had this situation where when Nike made their prototypes, there was no regulation. So their athletes could use it before anyone knew about it. And then they released it to the public and now anyone can buy it. Great. Now it's a little more level playing field. But then the governing bodies had to decide what to do with that technology. We saw this happen in cycling, right? We moved from steel frames to carbon fiber frames. Swimming, they had the speed suit. Ultimately, they pulled away and said, no, we're not going to let you use the speed suit anymore. Running is this is their turn now with the shoes, more or less. So now every other brand has to play catch up, right? Because if you're looking at like a pro Olympian, even a 2% performance disadvantage or advantage could be the difference between being on the podium or not. So now all the other brands that have sponsored athletes need to get their athletes a product that can compete. And we have like this time frame of catch up. During that time frame, they introduced the regulations. So then now all of a sudden prototypes have to get confirmed and verified. And that's a process. So now you can't just show up with your company's most recent prototype that no one knows about. You actually have to send in the specs and get it cleared and then have World Athletics sign off on it. So, and I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I believe if you want to break go after a world record, a world championship, or an Olympic medal, I think it has to actually be available to the public, if I'm not mistaken. So, and available to the public's like super subjective. It's like, what does that mean? Like we sell 12 models or 12 pairs or something like that. It gets really kind of weird as to what that actually means. But long story short is, I think you'll see every brand that has sponsored athletes with a version of this technology available now, if not so in the short term. So it just kind of is a little bit of a gray area in our sport in terms of, how do you look at records? Do records matter anymore? And, how does this square with like an era where drug testing was much less available and used versus a product which you can regulate a lot more objectively, I would say.
But I suppose the benefit now is that once everybody's caught up, then it then essentially turns into a level playing field again, then, doesn't it? So if that technology is there and it's available to everybody, then things kind of get reset a little bit, don't they?
Yeah, like in 10 years, it won't be an issue. So, like you get someone who's in middle school right now, like it's pretty much a non-issue for them because by the time they would get to a point where they're a professional runner, any brand they would have will likely have something that's going to be comparable. So yeah, but you just get the transition period, which is always going to be a little goofy, and it's kind of just how life works sometimes.
Yeah, brilliant. I wanted to ask you about races. So out of all the races that you've done, which are your favorites? Which ones would you want to do again? Or have you got a bucket list of races that you haven't done that you really want to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I got really interested in just these flat controllable 100-milers years ago. And I kind of told myself then, like, I'll keep doing these as long as they excite me. And by excite me, I mean like the training process. I need to enjoy the training process. And in the beginning, it was like I could just rinse and repeat basically, and I would still be excited. as I get older, it's like, I find that it's more valuable, I think, to take steps away from it from time to time and focus on something different and let that kind of just get that fire reignited more or less. But I also, the other thing I wanted to, one of the things that I wanted to make a goal of mine within my career was just to, walk away thinking, okay, I tried everything I could to find the fastest I could run on a controlled setting with, the resources available to me at the time. And I think I can run a faster 100-mile than I have. So I'm still kind of excited about trying to do that. So I'll definitely be taking some swings at some flat controllable 100-milers in the next few years. Races that excite me, I think they're two kind of fairly polarizing ones, is the Leadville 100. I'd really like to do that at some point. I just really like the way that course is kind of set up. I need to put myself in a position to be successful there. So, I mean, it's like, 10,000 plus feet of elevate, or you're at 10,000 feet or above basically that whole race. So it kind of means just being like all in, where I'm going to spend some time in the high country training and also spend some time just living out there leading into a race like that before I feel really comfortable, spending essentially half a year peaking for a race like that. The other one, kind of on the other side of the spectrum, would be like just really figure out how to run a quality 24-hour. I'm really interested in that event. I would say to date, I've kind of been 1 foot in, 1 foot out with it, though, just because it's not necessarily a distance or an event that I would consider like something that requires a ton of youth. So part of me is like, how much time and energy do I want to invest in preparing for an event like that I could probably still be as successful at in 4 or 5 years, versus something that maybe gets taken off the table from just a age out standpoint, where when we're getting into like these, really fast 100 miles or shorter, like 50 milers, 100Ks and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So you've essentially found your niche, haven't you? In running with the flat, fast stuff, and it'd sort of be you'd be putting yourself down a bit by not going after that, I suppose. If I don't know if you're that way inclined, that you were kind of a numbers guy, and you must be to a certain degree a numbers guy, that you're going for the fastest records and stuff over those like the 6 hour, the 12 hour, and everything. So it would be a shame to not see what your full potential is at that distance, especially when you talk about in the context of aging. I mean, do you mind me asking how old you are?
Oh yeah, no problem. I'm 35.
35, yeah. So I've got nearly 7 years on you. I'm nearly 42 this year.
You're in prime 24-hour age.
Yeah, so I've got like a bit of a plan. I'm injured at the minute, but I've got like every interview I do, I always end up saying I'm injured. But my sort of goal is now that I'm getting into my 40s, that to move away from the shortest, because I'd kind of focused on, I found my area was 50Ks, like trail 50Ks were like my up to 50 miles were my kind of area that I really enjoyed and trained for and could push at. But now I'm feeling like, as I get older, then I need to sort of shift my focus towards the longer races. And my ultimate goal is to do. Have you heard of the Spine race in the UK?
Yeah.
Yeah, Spine. So that's a race that I've got my eyes set on long term. And I know that just diving straight into like a 260-mile race is a big ask. So now I'm going to kind of work on that for the next few seasons. That's my goal as I get older. Maybe older. It's Dean Karnazes says, is it older, slower, wiser, something like that with his new book.
Lean on the wisdom and pick races where slow is the reality.
That's it. Absolutely. Just one of the things that I want to achieve with the podcast is I want to find out basically the why of ultra running. So for you personally, why do you run ultras? Why do you feel the need to put yourself through that amount of training and that amount of punishment and pain on the day? What is it that drives you to get up in the morning and know that you are going to carry on as an ultra runner and not just decide that, you know, I'm done with ultra running now, I'm going to take up golf, something like that? What is it? What is it that motivates you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I usually say like it's somewhat evolved, but perhaps a better way to say it is I've added things to what motivates me, and that's kind of continually bolstered my energy to kind of stay in it and keep trying to improve what I've done and things like that. So uh early on when I was younger, it was a lot of it was like, just trying to like, compete, chase records, that sort of thing. I think as I kind of went through that process a few times, that component remained there, but it also, other things became more valuable or in addition to it, and things of just like, well, like, how do I pick an event that excites me that I can control enough where I can kind of check from year to year as to whether I'm making improvements or regressions or plateauing and things like that. And as long as that kind of excites me, I think I'll probably kind of keep pushing the needle on it. And as long as there's, events that I haven't done yet that excite me too. So, is it possible that after I've run my last competitive flat 100-miler and I decide, okay, I'm going to focus on 24 hours, and I find out I actually really hate that, and decide, okay, well, I guess my options are either stepping back from running ultra marathons or, essentially having like worse results, then I'll have a decision maybe to make. I don't think I'll ever like completely remove myself from the sport, but, if I ever get to a point where it's just not fun anymore, or I'm not enjoying the process, then I'll definitely scale things back. And I think that would be it'd be less about like, all right, I'm out altogether, I'm not going to run anymore, and I'm going to, start bodybuilding or something like that. It'd be more like, all right, there's just no real reason for me to put in a peak 4 weeks where I'm hitting 20 plus hours of like training and strength work and, different supplementary activities that all kind of goes into getting me to where I feel like I can, wring myself dry on race day. It might be more like I can get to the finish line and have a good time doing this on 2/3 of the training or 50% of the training, and still be kind of a part of the sport. That's probably like, once I stop loving competing, that's probably the direction I would head with it.
Do you ever feel yourself feeling like you need another outlet? Because running has essentially become your life and your job, hasn't it? And initially, when we all start running, it's an outlet for something and we enjoy it. Do you feel like, have you got any other outlets that you sort of, any other hobbies that you sort of entertain to kind of keep yourself fresh for running? Or is it you just love running so much that you can have that as a single focus all the time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I definitely love running enough where I can sink tons of time into it and kind of make a career based around it. But I also think like a lot of times what I've done in the past is I've just like opened up my view of what could be kind of included within that regimen, I guess you'd say. So, that's where like the podcasting comes in, I guess. Like, that's a fun activity for me. Some of it is very running specific. Some of it's got nothing to do with running. The editing certainly has nothing to do with running. So there's certain things like that where I'll get interested in, like, that sort of stuff, that are fun. Some of the other things too, like, the technology side of things too. Like, I help out Ultra Footwear quite a bit with marketing and some of their, product development and things like that, which it is a piece of running equipment, but it is a little bit of a different avenue in terms of just like what I'm thinking about and doing. I'm typically not thinking about like shoe tech when I'm out racing or training, but I can be doing that in the meantime. So, that sort of stuff is always interesting to me. Just like, I mean, it's one of those things, I think once you go down the rabbit hole and you figure out how many different things actually do run parallel or can feed into it, but are maybe a little less directly tied to it. And I tend to gravitate towards those things. But I'm a pretty curious person. So I think like if I gave myself some time to explore things that were completely unrelated or even counterproductive to running, I could find a lot of things I'd be really interested in and could sink a ton of time in and be excited about. So if that day kind of arrives, I think I'll find something pretty quick. So who knows, maybe I will start golfing. There's some good courses out here in Phoenix.
Combining bodybuilding and golf. That's new sport there. Speed golf. Yeah, speed golf.
There you go. Yeah, you see that. Carl Meltzer does some speed golfing, I think, these days.
Yeah. So I suppose you keep yourself, even if you were like tomorrow, if you could never run again, you've still got all those things related to running, haven't you, with the podcast and with your coaching. So it's why would you choose other things when running can be your life? For me, although I'm injured at the minute, I keep saying this, I've discovered a love of paddleboarding. That's my new thing. But and it also, and I view it as cross training as well, because it's really good for your core, the pulling motion and the balance and everything. So I view it as being, while I can't run it as much as I normally do, it's something that I view as helping towards my running, even if I'm just kidding myself just to keep myself busy. Probably more like it.
Yeah, well, I think when you get to the even the longer running too, you start seeing a lot more value in some of the cross training activities that almost anything that has your body moving can at least be feeding into the mental aspect of what you're going to be tolerating on those really long efforts. So I think we've seen that a lot with some of the, especially some of the higher mountain runners too, where they're doing more ski mountaineering and, cycling and things like that. And a lot of different activities that probably keep them healthy and also hungry to be out there running when that side of their season kind of rolls around. So I think a multi-sport lifestyle is probably something that I'll end up doing eventually when I'm not looking at it through the lens of how is this going to negatively impact race day. when there's no longer a race day that is meaningful in a way that it is now, then I think, doing a little more paddle boarding, some cycling and stuff like that might be fun.
But that day isn't here yet, so don't start taking up paddle boarding just because I've
No, there are a couple lakes in Phoenix, but not enough to really suck me in, I don't think.
I find rivers are a bit more interesting anyway.
Okay, yeah.
If you try it, rivers a thing to do. I don't know how you're doing for time. Are you okay for another couple of more questions?
I've got about 10 minutes. That's okay.
Okay, brilliant. I wanted to, I didn't want to leave the TransCon off the table. So how were plans going for that? Because when I got in touch with you, that was, I assumed that everything was sort of going to plan with that. What's happened with your plans for the TransCon?
Yeah, so the TransCon was something I started kind of planning for as kind of like a big essentially the second half of the year. I mean, it's like a 6 to 8 week project if things go well. So things were going well at first. I think the logistics were in place. We had everything set up that was required to, kick off and find yourself on one end of the country and a few weeks later on the other end. But I acquired an injury. I think it was probably about 5 weeks ago at this point. It was the end of July, more or less. So it was my right ankle flared up on me, which was a little goofy because I was doing a lot of like controlled terrain or non-trail based terrain. So it's never given me issues on that, but I had it flare up on me at the tail end of a simulation day is what I was calling them, where I would basically kind of replicate what a day like would be on the TransCon journey, just to fine tune like what's going to work from a nutrition strategy, what's going to work in terms of like getting myself calmed down at night enough to sleep, and how does my body feel the next day when I get up after doing that and that sort of stuff. And then just the specific paces and mechanics of what was going to be a realistic like approach to a project like that, which is quite a bit different from what I've done historically. And so my right ankle ended up really swollen for about 2 or 3 days. Since the timeline was so like, we were kind of I was in the kind of crunch time, so to speak, with the last part of training and then obviously getting ready for the start of it. So I got an MRI right away, and it turned out I had like a couple partially torn ligaments kind of on both sides of my right ankle. So I had to take a couple of weeks completely off, and then kind of start to ease back into running. But basically, like, it took any potential A goal off the table for a transcon effort. So when I talked to there's a ton of people involved in that. So, I looked at it as, this is a team decision. This isn't a me decision. I need to talk to everyone involved, especially the folks that were going to actually be in the RV with me, because the last thing I want is, us to get halfway across the country and have an unworkable leg and have everyone invested that much time and energy into it. So everyone basically is on the same page that, like, this isn't something we need to rush. Let's get everything 100%, give yourself a chance to really kind of put your ankle through maybe some multi-day paces over the next couple of years, and find out like where the strengths and weaknesses are, what you're actually gonna have to do to get it to a point where it's going to be able to tolerate a project like that. And then we'll restart everything when it's ready. That's the nice thing, is a lot of the planning we did around it is basically stuff you can put on pause and then fire back up when it's ready. So hopefully we're doing the right thing, the smart thing. But that's where I'm at now. I had to postpone it for this year, and hopefully I've been able to get back into training the last 3.5 weeks, and things have been progressing about as well as I could expect them to do given the circumstances. So that's good. I should be able to do some single day races this year if things keep heading in the right direction, and then kind of decide what's next after that.
That's good. That's good news. I'm glad that it's not completely off the table, that it's you've still got those plans.
No, what I've been telling folks is it'll happen. The question is just when. So I'm willing to be patient. One thing I've learned from ultra running is there is a lot of exciting things, and if you really want to do them bad enough, you'll get to them, but they'll oftentimes happen on their timeline versus your timeline. So like when I ran the American record for 100 miles in 2013, my plans were to break the world record in 2014. So as it would be, it was 2019 before I finally got to that point. So I think sometimes you just got to be a little more patient and let things come to you when everything is ready, and then you'll be in a good spot to take advantage of the opportunity.
Which is the name of the game with ultra running, into patience. It's a patience game, into definitely.
No doubt.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, wish you all the best with all of your projects upcoming, and from me, I just wanted to say, thank you for all the advice that I've sort of gleaned from you over the years through the podcast and everything, and occasionally I've harassed you on Instagram, and you've always been kind to give you some answers to questions that I've got. So thanks for sharing a bit of that knowledge with us. So as far as like people getting in touch with you for coaching, as far as where's the best place to find you for these kind of things?
Yeah, the kind of one-stop area is my website at zachbitter.com. From there, you can link to all my social media channels, podcast, Strava, all that stuff. Check out what I'm up to. Discounts on brands that support me and things like that are all located there. From social media standpoint, I'm most active on Instagram, which is at ZachBitter, and then on Twitter at ZBitter.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. So for anyone watching who wants to find out more, that's the places to find you. So I really appreciate you coming on, Zach, and I know you're a busy man, and we appreciate you giving us your time. We look forward to seeing, watching what you get up to, what races you get up to, and what the post-COVID world has in store for us all as far as ultra running goes.
Yeah, well, thanks a bunch for having me on. It's been fun to chat, and I love doing podcasts. So thanks for the invite, and I'll look forward to your Instagram harassment in the future.
Appreciate your time. Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.